So thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This is happy hour, so cocktail hour, and I was told when I took my favorite course at Harvard, namely bartending, that a good cocktail has 3 ingredients, but not more, or you confuse people. So my brief comment here will be about 3 topics. I'm going to talk about the right-to-be-forgotten cases that are coming out of the European Court of Justice next week. Talk a little bit about GDPR. Don't you always have to talk a little bit about GDPR? And then a few words about machine learning and the future. So the right to be forgotten, well, why am I talking about that? It's next week, exactly 1 week from today, Tuesday, at 10 a.m., that the European Court of Justice will issue its 2 big cases. These are 2 of the biggest cases of my career. They're both Google cases. They're both right to be forgotten cases. But the law, the jurisprudence that they will make will go well beyond the right to be forgotten. And I just want to give a little bit of background so that you know what we're talking about when you read about those decisions next week. The first is about what is the scope of a removal, a delisting, if you will, under the right to be forgotten. Now, you may remember it was the European Court of Justice that created this right to be forgotten, this right to request Google to delist search results under certain circumstances. And the CNIL, the French DPA, had come to us and said, well, if somebody wants a result delisted under the right to be forgotten, we, the CNIL, think that delisting should be worldwide. And Google said, well, no, this is a European right created by the European Court of Justice. So the scope of delisting should be Europe. After all, the right to be forgotten was created under the European Data Protection Directive, created by Europe's top court, and is European law, and is a very unique balance between privacy on the one hand and people's right to access information on the other. And not every country balances that the same way. In fact, many countries around the world have explicitly rejected what the European Court of Justice did. Supreme Courts in Chile, Colombia, the United States, and others have said, no, that's inconsistent with our legal system. So the big question is, what's the scope of a delisting? Is it in Europe only, under European law? Or will the Court of Justice agree with the CNIL and say a delisting under the right to be forgotten should be worldwide? Well, you know what I think, you know what we've been arguing, but I argued against the right to be forgotten in the original Costeja case in 2014, and I was sure we were going to win, and boy, we lost completely, so there you go. We'll see what happens. The other question that they're going to answer, it's an unrelated case, but it will happen on the same day, and it also came out of the right to be forgotten topic, is what about sensitive personal data? What if somebody is saying, I want to remove something in a Google search result because that is sensitive data about me? And if you read the GDPR literally, and I invite you to do so, the provisions on sensitive personal data, you will see it's kind of hard to come up with exactly what the legal basis for processing sensitive personal data is by a search engine in the context of search. There's no explicit consent from the data subject. We have no idea who they are. It's hard to figure out what it is. On the other hand, if the court says somebody has an absolute right to remove sensitive personal data from search results, well, then the whole idea of freedom of expression has just been massively undermined. Every politician could have anything removed that they don't want on search results. It's a big question, and it's a tough one. I don't know what the court is going to do, but I've been investing years, literally, of my professional life in these cases. These are 2, as I said, 2 of the biggest cases of my career, with implications that go way beyond the right to be forgotten, way beyond privacy law, and really go into rules about who gets to decide what the rules are that govern the way the internet works, not just in my own country or my own region of Europe, but literally worldwide. Because if France can order removals of search results, not just in France or not just in Europe, but worldwide, as of next Tuesday, well, I assure you, China and Turkey and lots of other countries are going to start doing exactly the same thing the next day. And that's what's at stake. So stay tuned for that. We'll have no more insights into that until next Tuesday, but you'll see a lot of press on that. Second topic, the GDPR. Well, I was reminded by the organizers here that this is my 5th time at BitCom. So it's a great conference, and thank you all for being here. It's a privilege for me always. And I remember last time saying, well, what did you do to get ready for the GDPR? And what I said last time was, well, we had spent, and we counted this up, 500 human years of work. So if any of you are representing small and medium-sized enterprises, feel free to quote the amount of work that Google, a big company, granted, put into getting ready for the GDPR, 500 human years. But now we're 18 months into it, so the question is, well, what are you doing now? I mean, what does compliance for Google look like in this space? We are now 400 people who work on privacy full-time at Google. I was the first. I was hired. Like a lot of perhaps you in the room, you are the one and only full-time privacy professional in your companies. And that's what I was too, a long time ago. And thank you for reminding me that I'm young after having been there that long. But anyway, we've grown into this very large organization. Who are the 400 people? Well, the 400 people are not principally lawyers or administrators. I mean, a few of us are, but really the bulk of them are engineers. So when people say, what's hard about the GDPR? What I say, well, GDPR is two different things. One is kind of the accountability framework aspect of it. And all of us are responsible for living up in our company's accountability. That could be appointing a DPO. That could be conducting DPIAs. That's all the kinds of stuff that we've been hearing a lot of in the course of the day. That's the accountability framework. But the other piece, and arguably I think the harder piece, is actually building the ability to comply with the spirit of the GDPR in how data is managed. Just give one example. The GDPR says, and I think it's great, it says that people should have a right to data portability. People should be able to say, that's my data, I want to take it with me and go somewhere else with it, to a competitor, for example. Easy to say and really hard to build. That takes a lot of engineers and a lot of skills. Most engineers, by the way, are dedicated to keeping data secure, to making sure that it stays in place and is used. They're not usually building systems to allow it to be taken away. If you think about it, that is inherently a vulnerability, right? So to build it in a way that lives up to the GDPR while also preserving the security of it is enormously important. So as I say, the majority of the 400 people at Google who are working on privacy issues now and what I would call GDPR compliance are actually engineers building these tools. When people ask me about the tools, I said, is that just something for privacy geeks, for the kinds of people like us in this room who care about that? Well, our team built something called Google Account. They built the ability for people to access and control their own privacy settings. And I worked with the team as we were dividing and building those settings. And over again, we would ask ourselves the question, well, this is a lot of work, but is anybody going to care? In the real world, are people really going to use this stuff? Are they going to use the tools that we are building for them to control their own data? So let me give you a couple statistics, because I think it's kind of mind-blowing. This year, we've had over 2 billion, I say billion with a B, people use Google Control privacy settings. 2 billion, well, worldwide, but it's an amazing number. I mean, I was expecting something like, that's like 1,000 times more than I personally was expecting. The other thing people ask is, does anybody change their privacy settings? In other words, once a company sets a default, does that essentially become the rule for everybody for all time because people are lazy and won't bother? Statistic, again, over half of the people who use the tool actually changed one of their settings. Over half. Two big numbers. Both of those numbers tell me that if you build a tool to let people control their own data and you make it easy to use, people will use it. People want to use it. So our responsibility under the GDPR was, of course, to have a compliance program for accountability, and everybody has that. But I have no particular insights for you in this room about how we're doing that any better or worse than you're doing that. We're all trying to figure it out. But building the tools to let people control their own data, that's something I profoundly believe in, and that takes a lot of work. And so I'm hoping over time the tools that we're building at Google for the users of our own services can become things that can be used by other people as they use their own services. There is no reality in which the small and medium-sized enterprises of Europe or the world are going to be able to build all of this by themselves. The GDPR is an enormously complicated piece of legislation, and SMEs are going to have to rely on tools that are built by companies with bigger resources, and that's just a reality. I actually think it's a marketing opportunity for us as well. The final thing I want to talk about briefly in opening remarks is the future. I mean, that's what gets me up in the morning. That's what I care about. That's why I'm excited about this field. And the future, I think, is quite obvious: machine learning and artificial intelligence. I don't even think anybody doubts that that is the trend, that's the revolution of our lifetimes in the future. Now, this fellow and I have something in common. We have biological intelligence. And both of us have a limited biological intelligence. Mine may perhaps more limited than his, but be that as it may, we just don't get smarter. I mean, after a certain age, boom, your brain's done. We're not doubling in power every 2 years. I mean, wouldn't that be nice? From the age of 2, you could say, no worries, every 18 months my memory will double indefinitely. Every 2 years, don't worry, my processing power of my biological neurons will double forever. And in 50 cycles, I'll be 1 million times more intelligent, because that's actually what happens when you double 50 times. Well, he and I, unfortunately, and you, are stuck with the biological brains that we have. And the challenge for us, and I say not just for us as a privacy community, I actually think the challenge for us as a species, as a species, is what do we do in a world where the machines double in power and intelligence every 2 years or so, basically forever? There's no limit. They don't stop when they have reached human-level intelligence. We like to talk about, artificial intelligence as that moment in time. It's an arbitrary moment in time where machines have reached human-level intelligence. Doesn't matter. That's just something that matters to us as humans because we're comparing them to us. They don't stop there. They continue to double after that, right? And so when I look at this entire revolution, of which we are just at the absolute beginning, I think it poses some of the most difficult ethical and legal questions that any of us will ever be dealing with in our lifetimes, and they're not going to stop today. They're going to become more and more amazing over time. I'm looking at some of the stuff that is already happening in the field of machine learning. Already today, I'm not talking about science fiction. A Google project now with machine learning has an algorithm that can spot diagnose 26 different forms of dermatological conditions at more accuracy levels than human dermatologists. Again, we're talking about an algorithm. No cost, no specialist, just a machine. We're talking about machines that can do amazing things in the field of health. We're talking about machines that can figure out biometrics. And everybody knows the biometric of the fingerprint or the retina. But did you know that your heartbeat is a biometric that is completely unique to you? And that laser scans can now, through clothing, actually conduct a biometric of your unique cardiac pattern? So think about a world where we have to confront the privacy challenges of the use of widespread biometrics, which is not just those things that we traditionally understood, fingerprints and retinas, but things like, the way your heart beats, you have no control over that. The rhythms of your speech that you were born with. That is profound in terms of how power like that will be used. Will be used by individual companies. Perhaps they just want to sell you something, an ad. Perhaps by governments for good to fight crime, for bad to control their citizens. I mean, these are questions that are going to keep us very preoccupied for a very, very long time. When I think about this in particular, I think it raises lots of questions about who's in control. And I don't just mean who is in control of a particular machine or a particular algorithm. I think of it more as who's in control of a power, because these tools will become ever more powerful tools. And tools are agnostic as to how they are used. They can be used for profound good, and they can be used for profound ill. Let me give you just one example. Again, not science fiction. This is just stuff today. AI, as you may have been reading or may have seen, is incredibly good at generating deep fake. Have you heard the phrase deep fakes? Deep fakes can be faces. They can create my face, or they can create an entire non-living synthetic face of a human being that doesn't actually exist in a way that none of us could tell the difference. They could create a fake of my face, speaking in my voice that was synthetically generated, saying words that I never spoke, in a video in which I never appeared, published in a place of which I have no control. Now try to imagine that in the context of controlling the accuracy of the global political debate. That's kind of terrifying, isn't it? I mean, so there will be this attempt to create these tools that will be incredibly interesting in some ways, but that will just raise profound social questions about how we use them responsibly and how we control them to make sure that they serve human good and not undermine the values that we care about deeply. So I'm going to stay for the panel, but thank you for that. Thank you.